I'm not writing, so definitely pass it on, so.
That's by design. That's why we have a professional do it and someone else take the credit.
You ready? Okay, I'd like to open the Polk County Polk County budget hearings scheduled today. We'll call to order. Everyone is in attendance. Do we need introductions?
For choice.
Let's do introductions. Let's start over here to my left. Matt.
Craig Polk, Polk County Commissioner.
Lyle Motors, Polk County Commissioner.
Robert Hartman.
David Johnson.
Blair Wasson. Jeremy Gordon, Polk County Commissioner.
Rick Hansen, Budget Officer.
And thank you very much.
Introduce yourself if you want.
Yes.
We have
Your
Nicole Pineda.
who's taking notes and minutes for us.
actual secretary.
Now I'd like to call to the election of the chair. Do we have any nominations?
Nominate Mr. Johnson for chair and Mr. Hartman for vice chair.
No, you can't do that. You can only nominate one at a time.
All right. Mr. Johnson for chair.
Second.
Any other nominations? We have first and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn this meeting over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Morthurst. At this time, we need to elect a vice chairman. Are there any nominations for vice chairman?
Nominate Mr. Hartman.
Second.
I heard
For which
a,
one?
Mr. Pope, which motion did you second?
I'm sorry, Mr. Watson's motion.
So there has been a nomination of Mr. Hartman and a second of that motion. Are there any other nominations? And those in favor of Mr. Hartman serving as vice chairman, please signify.
Aye.
We need now to nominate a secretary. Are there any nominations for secretary?
I nominate Commissioner Gore.
I'll second that.
We have a nomination and a second for Commissioner Gordon to serve as secretary. Are there any other nominations? Those in favor of Commissioner Gordon serving as secretary, please indicate by an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is approval of the minutes from April 6th and 7th, 2021. Those minutes have been included in the budget binder. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
There has been a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Those in favor, please indicate with an aye. Aye. That the motion passes unanimously. The next issue is adopting procedures and rules, standard operating procedures for this budget process. Is there a motion?
We may want to go over them. This is Jeremy's first budget.
Oh, okay.
They're in the book. They're in the first section of the book. How we operate. The budget committee, and that is obviously everyone's been elected. We know who the chair, vice chair, secretary are. We go through the budget. We start with the budget message, review revenues, don't tentatively approve revenues until we're done with the whole general fund. We go through individual departments. Historically, I would present the budget and then the department head would speak. When COVID hit, we removed the element of the department head being here to speak on behalf of their budget, and I did the whole presentation. We have continued that format since then. Department heads are always welcome to come down, and if there are questions in that, they can be asked. Some are going to watch it remotely, but that is how we are currently doing it. If you have questions about the budget, the proposed budget, you can ask me and I'll hopefully satisfy your answer. If not, we will put it on a callback list so we get more detail in that when we come back on Thursday. And if we can't satisfy it on Thursday, we will have it prepared in depth on May before we formally approve. The other rule that is I learned early in my life is you tentatively approve the budget, but if you want to add anything to the proposed budget, it requires a motion and a second, and then it gets put on an unfunded wish list. And at the end of this process on Thursday, we will review that list and approve any additions to the proposed budget. Motions to delete are always in order though, however, so it doesn't require waiting till Thursday. You just delete, and then sometimes it gets put back on the wish list and those kind of things. But it's a pretty easy process. It's worked well. We've done the unfunded list for the last 25 years because we found early in the process, everyone who got to go first got all the extra money, and everyone at the end, you're going, darn, I wish I'd have known about that one. I probably wouldn't have done this one. So it makes it more equal and gives you a better feel for what you want to add to this budget or not. So those are the basic standard operating procedures for the budget. And you know, there are no fouls in this game, so it should be fine.
Quick question of clarity. Under section E under number 3, those deletions, are those treated the same as a unfunded item,
No, deletion's automatic.
which is automatic? Okay,
But someone else could say, I move to put it on the unfunded list after it's been deleted
gotcha.
to bring it back.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion? There a motion to approve the procedures and rules?
So moved.
Did I get a second to that motion? Thank you. There's been a motion and a second to adopt the procedures and rules as proposed. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The procedures and rules of governance are adopted as proposed unanimously. At this time, it's time for the budget message. Mr. Hanson.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in your budget book, there's a tab labeled budget message and summaries. It's right after the first one. So the 22-23 budget is a budget that is being put together for the first time, essentially after at least a majority of the COVID experience has been completed. There's a new normal, but I don't think it's been completely defined yet. You're finding a lot of money at the state level that they are pushing out the door as we speak. They've allotted a lot of monies that we know probably are coming, but we don't know the rules attached and those kind of things. So I think the budget that you tentatively approved this week will be much different than the one we formally approved in May. And then what we adopt in June may even be further changed. But it's an interesting budget. It's an interesting time. The good thing is fiscally, we're very healthy. The general fund is healthy along with the majority of our major funds. So that is the good news. I can go into the details. The general fund is going to see an increase of about $4 million this year. And then that's a 14% increase over last year. Staffing level increases are not going to be great. They're going to be just under 2. One of the major funding increases in the general fund this upcoming year is a one-time grant from the state, I believe, Marine Board to address Buena Vista Park. There's a major revamping of that park. A chunk of, or a little of it will get done this fiscal year. The majority of it will be done in the in-water work period this next fiscal year. And that's, I think our total grant amount was 1.6 million. I budgeted 1.5 for this upcoming fiscal year. We'll probably spend 100 before this year's out. So Matt's in charge of that project, and they've been paying the smaller bills right now. Like I said, majority of it will occur after July 1. The other funds that we're seeing increases in, Public Works is seeing an increase of $800,000. Behavioral Health is seeing an increase of 10%. In their case, that's a chunk of money. There's a good chance that that 10% will triple by the time we adopt this budget. So there is a lot of money in the pipeline for behavioral health. We don't know exactly how much it is, but their budget could see an additional almost $10 million from what we're proposing right now. You asked me if there's an end to it. I would have said there should have been an end a while ago, but it just keeps on coming. Public health is, their budget's going to see an overall increase, but in actuality, the workload is going to be decreased with COVID nearing its end, or at least hopefully nearing its end. The money that came into them is mostly money left over. There will be a lot of that money being returned to the state. I think we just returned $300,000 of money we couldn't spend. We couldn't figure out how to spend those kind of things. So there was that much money coming into the system.
Rick, I got a question. What happens to that money that goes back to the state? What does the state do with it then? Do they reallocate it? You don't know.
I wouldn't want to say on the record what I think they're going to do with it. But my guess is most of that money was CRF money. I do not know what they're going to do. They may have to return it to the feds.
Okay.
They may get an exclusion from the feds to put it into different programs and that, but we knew we couldn't spend it. When you're getting millions and your budget is used to getting half of that amount and you double or triple it, it's just overwhelming. So, but my guess is they will ask for an exclusion from the feds to extend that period of time and beef up public health services. So we may get it back in a different form, but right now we're giving it back because we couldn't expend it in the time frame that we were given. So, and then you saw, a total of, overall budget, we have an increase of almost $3 million, an FTE increase of 28. The major increase in FTE is in behavioral health. There's 20 in their budget. And that's to address potential new programs and those things. So, like I said, it's tough to know where we're going to end up with this new normal. I just know at least a lot of money is going to be flowing into behavioral health. And that's not because of COVID, it's mostly because of, legislation that's been passed or their attempt to address homelessness and those kind of things. And they're funneling it all through behavioral health. Why behavioral health is supposed to solve the homelessness problem, don't know, but that's the easiest way for them to get money through. So that's where they're pumping it. So the next section of the budget message is just history. If you're interested in the history of the budget committee, it is a very, very narrow snapshot of what has occurred over the last 10, 12 years. Program changes, like I said, general fund's going to see a pretty healthy increase in both revenue and a small increase in personnel. Public Works, most of that money is federal money that came through late, and as a result, we had increases in beginning fund balances and those things. The ice storm itself that we experienced a year ago, we're probably going to get the money next fiscal year. I'm not including it in this fiscal year because the feds are notoriously late in getting us our money. So that's $1 million plus that we're getting through FEMA reimbursement that we've already spent. And that's why Public Works budget is very healthy at this time. Health services, you had a small increase in FTE and a decrease in appropriations. Partly that's because the PCN, which is the mental health organization that was Marion and Polk County that no longer exists has distributed all of its funds, and those funds that we received from BCN went into health services. Last year's budget, they received 600,000. This year, they got a small amount compared to the 600,000. So that's all cleaned out, and that, like I said, general fund revenues increased, 14% in the general fund, other funds, a little over 3 or 4% in the overall budget. Turning the page, you can see, the fair fund has a decrease in operating budget. They're still more than healthy. We did a lot of work on the fairgrounds during COVID. It was a good time to do work on the fairgrounds since you didn't have the ability to have many people there. So we did some maintenance, replaced the main ceiling in the main building, those kind of things. This year, we're still continuing that work. Next year, in this budget, that will begin to level off. There is some funding that the state is giving to local fairs. There's a $40 million allotment. We will get 280,000 of that. We think they're still trying to figure out how to distribute that money. That is not in this budget. I should know by May, and I'll include it in the budget if we do. That 280,000 is intended to be spent on infrastructure and more of one-time things rather than staffing and those kind of things and operating. So we will be doing further upgrades if that money comes to fruition, and my guess is it will. We just don't know in what form. We don't know if we have to apply for it or we automatically get it. They're still trying to decide that. Some of the counties that think they deserve more want one way, and some of the other ones want it just to be more of a flat line. You get this based on population or whatever. So, we'll figure it out. But so that's what's new in the fair. American Rescue Plan's probably the biggest thing that we have in our budget that's occurred new last year. When you formally approved the budget, that was a new fund that we created last year to receive the $16.8 million that we're getting in totality in that distribution. We received 8.3 or 8.4 last year. We will receive that again a year from then. So we'll get another 8.4 this May. And then we will begin spending down. We've spent down approximately 3 million of that already. But as things get into further down the road, you'll be having emergency communications projects that will take $1 million plus out of the fund. You'll have broadband, which will take $500,000 out of the fund. We're doing more than $500,000 worth of broadband because we received additional 1.6 million from Senator Boquist in an allocation to address broadband. So that 1.6 shows up in economic development, and the rest of it stays in ARPA, and we'll pay appropriately. There's a whole bunch of funding requirements or reporting requirements that Caitlin in the back gets to deal with along with me. So we try to keep everything as separate as we can so we don't mix and match and make it less confusing. Already mentioned the FTE increases, 28 in the other funds, and a little under 2 in the general fund. Salaries and benefits, the county, this would be a year that we wouldn't have, all our labor agreements are signed. However, we're beginning to have some mid-year contract negotiations, something we haven't done. And partly it's because of the high rate of inflation and the low rate of COLA that we're getting. It's making it harder to retain employees. People are bumping salaries up as the workforce shortage occurs. We've just begun those mid-contract negotiations. I've met with the DSA right now. We will be meeting with ASME pretty soon, and then the other two labor unions are fairly small, so they will follow. We need to address those two unions first. The AFSCME and Deputy DA negotiations, or I mean, current contract ends June 30th of 23. FAPO, which is parole and probation, and the Deputy Sheriff's Association, both those contracts end June 30th of 24. So we're set. If these mid-contract negotiations don't work out, we have contracts in place and we'll pay what we pay and we'll move on from there. As inflation stays high, though, it makes it difficult to settle at 2.5%, 3. Those numbers tend to creep up to, the 4.5, 5 level. Just to put you on notice. So PERS, this year, we don't have a PERS increase. It's in the second year of the adjustments, which occur every 2 years. Next fiscal year, the next proposed budget, we will be dealing with a PERS increase. However, the rumor on the street is the normal 4.5% increase that occurs is not going to occur. They had some healthy returns, so they're going to reduce the rates to employers, which is, in my opinion, a bad move. They're continuing to kick the can down the road, which, it used to be at the end of the 2020s, you were going to be back to that tip and then start going down. Now it's 2032. Now it's probably going to be 2034. They haven't learned from past mistakes, in my opinion. When you have a good year, you just reduce, you keep the natural increases the same and just reduce your unfunded liability. But PERS is run by someone else and we're just in it, and we have to respond to however they do it. So if they do decide to put that rate below the 4.5, I may be coming back to you guys with a proposal to charge our departments at 4.5, and take that additional and put it in a separate PERS fund to absorb bigger increases down the road. That will be something as a discussion point, but don't know for sure if that is just the rumor on the street that the PERS rates are going to be less than 2. So, we can do with it whatever we want. That'll be a 2-year thing. When they have a bad year in the stock market, then they'll want to push it to 6. But they'll say, oh, that's too high, so we'll reduce it to 4, and it'll kick the can down the road to, almost 2040. That's how PERS works. Our unfunded actuarial liability went up $5 million this last year. And that's a 2020 number. They lag significantly on that information, but we went from 35 million essentially to 40 million. And that's a number that can be modified or messed with. All you have to do is modify some actuarial assumptions and you can make that number explode up into the 60, 70 million, or you can reduce it down to less than 20 just by 1% change in an assumption you make. Health insurance, we've been blessed with the last 2-3 years of very little change in health insurance. We're hearing back from one of ours that they're looking at double-digit increases this next year. Don't know if that's going to be the final number, but that's one of our 2 health insurance providers have that out on the table. So, and then the last paragraph in that section just kind of gives you an example of how much more it costs to have the 150 employees that we didn't have 10 years ago. Internal charges, we charge out internal charges. They increase as appropriately as needed. You have rent, you have management services, you have IS/GIS charges, and then you have an insurance cost that we charge out to all departments. you don't have the biggest increases, I think, are in management services. But a lot of that was absorbed by, so the departments, we saw a 12% increase in management services, but the departments didn't see hardly any because we're charging management services charges to the American Rescue Plan, which we're allowed to do. We're actually allowed to charge a lot more than we are. But that absorbed a lot of that increase. So you won't see that 12% increase in the individual budgets, but it did occur. So I put it in there. General fund, we have very little capital outlay in the general fund. It's rare that we have anything other than vehicles unless maybe the clerk buys a new vote tabulation machine or something like that. And that occurs about every decade. So most of the things we have in capital outlay in the general fund are routine. They're replacement vehicles for the sheriff's department. And in this case, there's one for community corrections. Other funds, capital outlay, you have your normal public works. They have a chunk in replacement pickups, and then they have some heavy equipment. There's a detailed sheet when we get to public works on Thursday, looking at all the capital outlay that you have. Court security, that's just a plug number. Whether we spend it or not, we never know. Behavioral health has $750,000 allocated for building renovation. We're in the process of buying an additional building in the Dallas area, the old Wells Fargo Bank. That will turn into a 24/7 operation for addictions type services that is being required by the state. Money will follow, probably in the tune of $4 to $5 million. That's one of the ones I don't have in here because they said they were going to have an answer for us in February, then March. It's now April, and they think they may have the answer for us in May because they're finding that more people counties wanted more money than they had available, and now they're having to figure out what to do with that request. They didn't think they would have that. And then you have the other typical capital outlays. We still have some building improvement monies and public works construction monies. You also always have $700,000 as a plug in economic development for a community development block grant if it occurs or doesn't occur. It hasn't occurred in the last 15 years, 20. So the other section is transfers at the bottom of that page. General fund transfers had slight increase of 11%. Public health transfer remained the same. Juvenile was increased from 770 to 800,000. Transfer to public works, 150,000 is just a number that's chosen. It's state forest receipts. Sometimes that number is as low as 20. Sometimes it's been as high as 600,000. So we just kind of put it at 150. Whatever we receive from that account, we just transfer over to public works. So this year we're in the 80,000 range right now. Whether we get to 150, don't know, but it's just the number we use. Transfer to the dog control is proposed to increase 10% or $10,000 or 10%. Same thing in this case, going from 100 to 110.
So excuse me, there, Greg, do you think that's enough or we're going to be taking on the dog control?
It is if we only take on Dallas's, because Dallas's, we're not increasing staffing. If we get other cities putting that burden on us, my guess is the sheriff and captain will come down requesting at least an additional half body, if not full body, to address that.
Thank you.
But for now, because we're going to get licensing fees from the Dallas, that we should be able to cover it adequately with the current staffing in that. Yeah, transfer to the fair fund increased from 190 to 200,000. Veteran services I have at 90,000. Transfer to law library is 20,000, domestic mediations 5. A lot of these are just the normal transfer amounts that we've been allocating lately. 150 to family and community outreach. And then there's some transfers from management services to courthouse improvement. There's some transfers from American Rescue Plan to individual funds and those kind of things. Contingencies, you can see that the general fund contingencies going up, 300 plus thousand. You have, let's see, Public Works, their contingency is about the same. Behavioral health is up and public health is a little down. And that should be, pretty close. Behavioral health could increase significantly because the money they give us will probably not be able to be spent as quickly as they hope. So and I think a lot of their money is for a period of 2 years. So we will be rolling over more money that we have to. So that's where you are on contingencies, and conclusion is, I think we do a very good job here providing services to the general public. Don't get a lot of citizen complaints. We get the normal ones. I wish my gravel road was paved. Once it gets paved, then you get the complaints that they're driving too fast, those kind of things. But overall, I think the county is doing an excellent job, and our department heads and elected officials, a majority of the reason behind that, and the staff that we have, so, and the direction that the board gives. So you have any questions about the actual message? I can go on. The next 2 pages in your budget book is basically the whole budget summary in a nutshell. It shows all the proposed departmental expenditures, the contingencies, the transfers, and those kind of things. We will go over these in more detail when we get into the budget. The next 8 or 9 pages are just, graphs, pie charts, and that. You can see that, revenue wise in the general fund, the biggest part of our funding is property taxes. And then you get intergovernmental, which tends to be money coming to us from the state. And then you have a beginning fund balance and fees. And, you can see that property taxes along with the operating levy are basically 45% of our revenues in the general fund. So the operating levy makes up, almost 10% of our budget. We will be talking at some time when we have a break in the action of that about the upcoming levy. We will be going out for reauthorization of that levy in May of 2023. Currently, we're at 42.5 cents. This budget will be the beginning of year 4 of that. If we go out and are successful with the reauthorization, it will wipe out the last year of the existing levy and start a new cycle all over again. We tend to go 4 years instead of 5, because if you wait till the 5th and you lose, you're laying off a majority. There'd be a huge disruption to the department along to the services we deliver. So it gives us time, if there's a hiccup and we don't pass a levy, to adjust or do whatever we need to make sure we do pass the levy, because operating without the levy will return us to some very dark times in the public safety sector, both for the sheriff's office and prosecution upstairs. You can see who the big spenders are, and well, that continues revenues. O&C revenue this year is supposed to return to 2017 levels, which means instead of the 500,000 we're getting, should be getting about 725,000. So that's an additional revenue that we'll be seeing in this upcoming budget.
But to be clear, that's not coming from timber harvest.
No.
That's coming from SRS.
RS, yeah. I still call it ONC, but it's the replacement for ONC. It's Secure Rural Schools. And you have, that amount is always in fluctuation, is always in negotiation. You never know. They're late in their payment this year, but surprise, surprise. We should get it before the end of the fiscal year. So
Just curious on that, why there were zero budgeted amounts for that in some of these.
Because- at those times, we didn't know if we were getting anything.
Really?
And then it would be a last minute save sometimes.
Well, it was SRS actually timed out, so it hit its maturity date, and so we did have a gap there for a year, at least a year, where we didn't have an SRS amendment. So this current SRS amendment is in the transportation bill. So it was one of those millions of tags that were added in the transportation bill.
I think it's good for
2 years.
2 years, right?
2 years.
So we have this year, or this coming year, we'll be receiving and the other, so. That's where you are on that funding, and that's why it's hard to budget when you don't know if that's coming or not. Then you can look at all funds and how we get our money. A lot of our money is either in beginning fund balance or in intergovernmental. Most of intergovernmental is your behavioral health, has no general fund property tax money in it. It has tax money in it, believe me, because it comes from the feds in the state, but not property tax money. So that's what you have, looking at everything as the budget in totality. If you look at expenditures, general fund, public safety is our biggest expenditure. If you put the sheriff, community corrections, the district attorney all together, and some of the transfers to juvenile, you are about 2/3 of our general fund budget is expended on public safety. And that's not, unusual. A lot of counties are at that level, depending on how much they have in their general fund or not. Some counties put a lot of departments in their general fund, a lot take them out. So we're kind of in the middle of that, but public safety is usually your biggest expenditure within your general fund, unless you have dedicated law enforcement districts and dedicated funds, kind of like Deschutes County that.
And that 2/3 includes the levy revenue.
Well, yeah, I'm just talking expenditures. So 2/3 of our expenditures are on public safety in the general fund. 45% of our revenues in the general fund are property taxes or the levy. So, yeah, 3 million of property taxes are the levy, and then the sheriff alone spends almost 13.5 million. So that levy doesn't pay for all of the sheriff. The DA is another 2 million. So, there's a chunk that gets paid out of general fund property taxes also. And they receive some rental revenue for the jail and those kind of things. So it's not a complete expenditure out, no revenue in, but it's mostly expenditure out and not enough revenue in to cover their costs. So, and then the last pages, you just have all the departments, and you can see the level of expenditure and how they've grown over the years. You can see that the sheriff's office and public works are growing at a greater rate than, the DA and the fair, surprise, surprise. And then, the last one, in a league of its own is behavioral health, continuing to just move up and those kind of things. So that's it for the graphs and that, and the whole budget message. The next section was just a little introduction to revenues. Happy to answer any questions you have on general fund, total fund, whatever. I already bored you guys to death. All righty.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
One of the misconceptions, of course, is that Polk County utilizes 100% of property taxes collected. Is that indicated anywhere in here, sort of the proportion of property taxes that actually end up in our general fund versus going to districts and other,
Well, no, I mean, yes and no.
it wouldn't really belong in a
When-
budget, but.
Yeah, when you get to the section on tax collector, you're going to see that we collect $110 million of taxes. And that's countywide, so that includes every fire district, cemetery district, soil and water extension, Polk County, school districts, everything. We collect 110 million, which the tax collector distributes out to the taxing entities. Of that, we collect about 17 million for Polk County. That includes both the levy and property taxes. And actually, it's probably 16 million. So we get on average about 15, 16 cents on the dollar of every dollar we collect in property taxes. The rest go out to those, you know, some very little like cemetery districts, others very big like cities and school districts and fire districts. You know, we have one or two big fire. So that's where your money goes, but approximately, you know, 15 cents on the dollar overall. If you're inside cities, we're down in the 11 or 12 cents. If you're in West Salem or Independence, if you're in Falls City, we're at 18, 19 cents. If you're not in a city, we're probably 21 or 22 cents because you don't have the city taxes. So we become a bigger chunk of their property taxes, but they aren't paying as much because they don't have to pay a city tax. It's just how it works. But yeah, we get, you know, easy way to say is for every dollar we collect, we get about 15 cents of it overall. So
Thank you.
on to revenues. You can see just a little one paragraph thing on revenues. You can see that property taxes are going up $660,000. That's basically a 3% guaranteed increase in your assessed value along with new construction. New construction can fluctuate to very little in recession times to very robust in a good housing market. So we have been averaging about 5% in total growth. I budget about 4.5% most of the time. So in good times, we're collecting more than anticipated. In bad times, I will even move that down. During 2008, 2009, that down period, I think our lowest growth rate was under 3%. That's when you do property taxes, it's the lesser of assessed value or real market value, or MAV or whatever they call it in the BOPTA field. Are you the BOPTA expert? But it's right now our assessed value is about 30% below real market value. It's only when that real market value crashes below the assessed value that you start collecting less than the 3%. So, and during that time, I think we had less than 10% fall below. If you're a county like Deschutes County during that time, they had 70% of their properties drop below because their assessed value and their $700,000 houses went to 350 like that. So they couldn't absorb that gap that they had created. So it's a small danger to Polk County, but it's still a danger. So I budget about 4.5% as a rule of thumb for me. And most of the time we're within a couple 100,000 plus or minus. And that's not bad when you're trying to calculate that. The next page, like I said, is general fund revenues. They kind of take care of themselves as you go through all the general fund departments. Like I said, you had a big increase in the Parks Department because of the one-time grant for Buena Vista Park. You had increases in property taxes, you had increases in SRS or O&C revenue, and you had some increases in community corrections and those kind of things that was under budgeted last year. So it's not more money coming into community corrections. It's just an adjustment of the revenues, which we didn't know at that time when we adopted. So if you want, that's all I have for general fund revenues. We can start individual departments whenever you want.
Let's move ahead with the individual departments. It looks like we're, time-wise, we're maybe even a few minutes behind.
I'll get you back. Don't worry. All right, the first budget in your packet is the clerk's budget. The clerk has two programs within her oversight. Our current clerk, Val Unger, has been our longtime clerk. She's not here, but she's, I think, listening or watching upstairs. If you have any questions of her, she would be more than happy to come down, but she doesn't want to come down, so that's okay. So the two functions that they handle upstairs is the recording of all land documents and those kind of things, along with providing marriage licenses, and they also are in charge of receiving the BOPTA appeals, and then BOPTA stands for Board of Property Tax Appeals, I think. It's a fun position for a board member that they try to pass on to others as soon as they can. It used to be a very lengthy process. There used to be 200 or 300 cases. Now there's a handful that actually go to the board. So it is more manageable and not as time consuming. Recording pays for itself, at least in the current market, partly because there's been a lot of documents being recorded the last few years, partly because of the financial refinancing and that, and also because documents have gone from 8 to 10 pages to 40 or 50 pages because of all the legal requirements and those things. So recording revenue has been very healthy for Polk County the last couple years, and I'm projecting it to be around the 700,000 mark. You can see historically, if you turn the page to page 2, in 1920, they collected almost 600,000. In 2021, they collected almost 800,000. That's just volume and size of documents. Budgeted 650, thought it was going to rebound and not be so heavy. We're going to get about 725 this year is what I'm guessing. So underestimated revenues on that. So this year I'm proposing the revenues around 700,000. Could that crash? Yeah. I mean, as interest rates go up, you won't get as many refis, but if people think that they're going to go up, they may all rush to get where they are. So you never know. So I think 700,000 is a good number. The actual expenditure budget is pretty much a status quo budget. There's increases in there for COLAs and insurance. Most of their materials and services are fairly fixed in recording. Everything is automated up there now, and it works really smooth. We have one dedicated person to recording, and about approximately 30% of Val's time is spent in the recording field. For other program budget is elections. That is probably the one that gets the most advertisement. If something goes wrong, obviously, we have been fortunate enough here not to make headlines. We do a very good job upstairs. Val does a great job as elections, head of elections. We have a chief elections clerk up there too. So we have 70% of Val's time spent on elections and registration and that. And then we have the one body that is in charge of elections. If you look at her program summaries, you will see that total ballots issued every other year, you have a big election because you have, you know, presidential or a more of a federal in that. So, you know, you have more elections, more volume, those kind of things. You can see registered voters continues to grow. That number 7 years ago, I think, or 8 was in the less than 50,000. Then you had voter registration, and that ballooned up the number of registered voters. We're not getting quite as many that come out for elections because that number is bigger. It requires more to show up. In the presidential and those elections, you're still getting the same percentage voter turnout, or tend to be, in these lesser elections. And I shouldn't call them lesser, but smaller elections, you aren't getting this quite the same volume. And that's unless there's a special, you know, ballot measure for something involving the state, or maybe a ballot measure involving money at a school or a city or something like that. That's usually what brings out the voters in the smaller elections. So, but overall elections are doing fine. They do a great job. She has a great, not volunteer staff, we pay them, but a staff that comes in and helps her with elections. State legislature is trying to make it, or hinting at trying to adjust elections. Each year there's an erosion of rules, in my opinion. This year, I think it's this election, if you're postmarked by the last day of voting, your vote counts. It may not be received anywhere until the next day or two, but if it's postmarked, then it counts. That's a new rule. Before, we had to have all the ballots in hand, or at least have been collected by 8 p.m. the last night of elections. So there's also voter ranked voting and those kind of things that have been addressed. One county's doing it, Benton County, in certain things. It's hit the state legislature, it has not passed. It may require half the counties to replace their vote tabulation equipment. Ours is capable of doing it. We just hope it never comes to fruition. But those are the things out there in elections and recording. And like I say, it's a very well-run department, probably the smallest staff to population ratio in the state. They're very efficient and very good at what they do. So we're fortunate to have Val and her staff up there. Questions on the clerks?
Looking for a motion to tentatively approve revenues and expenditures for the clerk.
We don't have to do revenue. We'll do that at the very end. Only in funds will we have to do revenues and expenditures. So just the expenditures.
Expenditures. So I'm looking for a motion to tentatively approve the proposed expenditures of the clerk budget.
So move.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And just a little note on the clerk's budget. I almost always give her more than she asks for. It's one of the few departments because she's very frugal. I want to make sure that she has enough operating monies to allow her to do her job appropriately. So. Next department is the assessor's department. They're the department that obviously appraises all the property, puts all the values and everything, and is responsible for turning over the assessment roll to the tax collector, and then it's the tax collector's job to collect the taxes. You can see that in her statistics and that you can see added growth. She's projecting 622,000. I think I have a total of 660,000 in new revenue for us. But growth is still continuing to occur. Appeals of value, you can see that's the BOPTA. You know, you had 29 in in 2021, but the last few years, that number has been much lower. They settle a lot of the discrepancies. Part of it's just education. They don't know why their property's value or taxes went up. They don't realize sometimes that, an operating levy or a bond was passed. Well, I didn't vote for that. Well, just because you didn't vote for it and it passed, you still have to pay for it. Well, that's not fair. Well, I probably agree with that statement, but it doesn't work that way. So, in the assessor's budget this year, you have budget highlights. You can look at all of her materials in there. She's asking for an additional appraiser this year with all the new growth and all the new construction. It's more than appropriate. So I granted that in the proposed budget. Their workload continues to increase. Probably the most interesting page is page 4 of her thing, where you can see how assessed value has grown historically over the years. So you can see that like in 2012, 2013, very little percentage change. You can see that we've been pretty healthy the last 4 years. It can't sustain that, in my opinion, but I can't tell you it won't occur this next year. That I believe will be, above 5, and I think we might be above 5 the following year. I just don't know, but you're seeing how that, when you have that healthy of growth, how that assessed value number grows quickly. We're averaging, 450 to 500 million a year, which gets you quickly $1 billion every 2 years. And it just keeps growing. So even though you're getting more tax revenue, I can guarantee that the cost associated with providing the service is going up very quickly. We'll discuss inflation and oil prices in Public Works when we get there on Thursday. There's plenty of cushion that I built in for fuel and asphalt and everything related to oil and contractors who haul for us because their fuel costs are going up. It just is a chain reaction. And they're probably the one that's hit the hardest of our service providers. The rest of it is insurance and competing with other counties for FTE and those kind of things. So, but you can see that is the chart I look at the most when I do the budget, is the growth chart. And that helps me calculate how much we're going to collect in taxes and how I get a feel for recording, because if all this stuff is moving, then Val's getting good recording. And there's a lot of things connected to the construction industry in our county for revenues. And it's a good indicator to look at those things to help you put a budget together. And I don't know why I do that. It's just, I've learned that over the years that construction market kind of dictates how healthy or not healthy we're going to be. So you have the actual budget on page 8. Like I said, there's an increase in FTE this year in the proposed budget. So her personal services costs are up 170,000 on the materials and services. There's some new software that we're using up there that have added some cost. We put in $16,000 in their budget. That's one of the big changes in their budget for materials and services. Everything else is fairly status quo. And then you had increases in some of the management services costs. Overall, it's a $200,000 increase in their budget, a little over. But I think to address the workload in that, and adding a new appraiser, isn't a cost that completely goes out. If you capture true value in that at the beginning, And during new construction, you get a more accurate tax distribution and appraised value on what is out there. So you recover some of that cost by just having better information and more accurate assessment of properties. So, but I don't attach that one's going to generate, $20,000. So but there is benefit to the whole system because there are a lot of counties that we're within cycle. There's a cycle at the Department of Revenue. I think it's either 5 or 7 years. We're in cycle. There are counties that are 5 or 6 years out of cycle. So you're dealing with a lot of discrepancy. If you bought new, you're up here, but someone else is down here. So they aren't adjusting and they don't have the ability to do their job. So
You're adding a new person here. Do you still have the problem of recruitment for this position?
never we haven't had a big issue so far with the appraisal section. Where we're having problems, obviously, are in the medical field, public safety. Those are your two biggest areas. Public Works has gotten a lot tougher because of the construction and what the private sector is paying out there. But we're seeing a squeeze everywhere. Hiring attorneys, good luck. So it's very difficult in certain.
But you're not seeing it for this.
We don't know. We don't go out that often for appraisers. So I think 2 years ago, last appraiser we've done. I don't know. Three. So we haven't really experienced it. We'll find out. We assume we'll find one, but that's the goal. So
Yeah.
that market and we'll see. I mean, you never know. We've gotten lucky on certain recruitments and we have more continuous recruitments than we've ever had in our history here. And that's just how the market is in that. But I really think the additional appraiser will make the system that much better, at least in Polk County.
No, I'm not worried about that. I was just worried about whether you're gonna find somebody.
We'll do our best. Let's put it that way. And if not, then it's Valerie's fault. So it's okay. Valerie's here if you have any questions of her. If not, I would recommend you tentatively approve the expenditures in the assessor's office.
Also move.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
You are tentatively approved with a smile on her face. Next budget is the treasurer's budget. On page 2, on page 1, you can see some of the,
Mr. Hanson, is it all right if we take a quick break?
we can.
All right, thank you.
All right. All 30% or 0.3 FTE added to this program budget. However, it's not an additional 0.3 for the county. It's just we had all of the chief treasurer clerk in the finance budget. We moved part of it to here to be a truer reflection of duties and those kind of things. You also have the elected officials salary of $12,000 or $1,000 a month stipend, and then the materials and services. So other than the addition of the 0.3, which again is not a true addition, it's just a reallocation in the budget. This is a very status quo budget for the upcoming year. And I would recommend tentative approval of the treasurer's budget.
Move to TA the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor of tentatively approving the treasurer's budget, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you have it.
No, I updated.
Okay. So it's just a change. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, it kind of shows that the treasurer was the overseer of the tax collector, and that's not the case. So it's now, it says tax collector, tax collector. You can see that in reference to Commissioner Gordon's question, it looks like total taxes levied are estimated at 115 million. This upcoming year, we're going to collect about 98% of those. That's a question that is normally asked. How much of property taxes levied do you collect? On average, we collect about 98%. When I first started here in 85, that rate was about 92%. Because at the time when I first started here, the interest rate that you were getting for not paying, or the interest rate you were getting in the banks was greater than the penalties you were getting for not paying your taxes. So most people now pay in November. We had people just not taking the discount, just waiting and waiting. The legislature figured that out in the late 80s, early 90s, and made the interest rate for late payments at like 16%. So that switched your how you received your taxes and that, and people then jumped on the 3% discount versus waiting not to pay their taxes. And my guess is there's certain people in the room that may have done that.
I know of people who do.
Okay.
Still a few people done that.
Yep. So, tax collector wise, everything else is pretty much status quo. You can see that property tax accounts continue to grow. That's new construction and those kind of things. Division. The budget is pretty much, like I said, a status quo budget. You have the staff up here, increase of about 0.3 on the clerical side, and then 20% of Caitlin's time is allocated to being tax collector. I would recommend tentative approval of the tax collectors.
Also move.
Those in favor of tentatively approving the tax collector's budget, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
All righty. We will move on to the district attorney. There's an incomplete program summary in your budget book for medical examiner. We've got better numbers to look at. Attorney has numerous programs within the general fund, and then also oversees a separate fund, CAMI fund. So the four programs that the district attorney oversees is prosecution, which is the main budget, then medical examiner, and then they have support enforcement, and then they also have victims assistance. Those are the four program budgets that he oversees within the general fund. There's a fifth that is in the general fund, but he does not oversee. It's CASA. It used to be under the district attorney 8 to 10 years ago. We moved it to its own separate entity. And that is something that the county has funded or partially funded since it left under the county's umbrella and is kind of their own 401 or 501c3 entity. So we will begin with the prosecution. Aaron has provided and Barb have provided program summaries some pie charts on referrals, and then a bar graph on page 4. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that. You can see from his program summary numbers that small increases in cases reviewed, small increases across the board in almost everything. This is the main function of the prosecution, not that his other programs aren't important, but this is the say it for me. Yeah, well, I was gonna go.
Muscatoo.
That one. It's like unanimous, but. Yep, that word. Thanks.
Greg, you didn't have to do that to make me feel better, but I appreciate it.
Yep. So again, this is pretty much, I would call again, a status quo budget. The difficult time that we're experiencing right now is hiring district attorneys. It is an epidemic statewide. The richer, higher paying counties are poaching, stealing, whatever you want to call it. District attorneys as we speak.
They call that a lateral transfer.
You can call it a lateral transfer, but they're stealing from us. It's okay. I don't have to be that politically correct. But Aaron has been experiencing, openings in his department for the past year. I think in the past 2 or 3 years, he probably had 2 weeks to maybe a month of fully staffed. And since then, he's been in a revolving door recruitment mode, which makes it very difficult to do your job when you aren't having the resources necessary to do your job. And it's not because he's not given the adequate funding, it's just the bodies aren't there. And it makes it very difficult. COVID didn't help, obviously, but as things move out of COVID and start gearing up, having enough bodies to do the work is very stressful on those that are remaining. Obviously, Aaron's here and Barb's here, and they can talk about any of the program budgets at any time if you have questions. But like I said, prosecution, status quo budget, in my opinion. Hopefully we can get the number of FTE that we have allocated, but Aaron hasn't been spending his budget just because of lack of numbers and bodies. So, it's unfortunate that the market is so difficult, but that's the reality. And it's not just a Polk County issue. It's a statewide issue, both on the prosecution side and on the defense side. I think the defense attorneys are having massive shortcomings too, and it's just a problem. So the next program budget is medical examiner. We've done this, we basically contract with either retired medical examiners or medical examiners to work over in Marion County. We've done that process for over a decade now, or close.
Easily over a decade.
And ever since we made the switch, we're not switching back. So it was a good decision. Everyone, I think, is good with the decision we made way back when. And this is the budget that pretty much pays for their costs associated with being medical examiner. If we end up spending more, we spend more because, this is a necessary function of the office and we're not going to just not show up. So this is the best guess that we have. And, they usually don't spend their full budget, but want to make sure we have adequate resources there for them to do their job. So if they need new equipment or new this and that, we try to provide that as much as possible. So again, this is, like I said, a status quo budget. The next program budget is support enforcement. This was started, I think, in the district attorney in the mid-80s when I was first here. John Fisher was our first, I think, support enforcement lawyer, and then later became district attorney in his career. We collect monies. You can see the monies in the program summaries of how much total collections they've gathered in support cases. It's a program that costs us about 33 cents on the dollar. It's mostly reimbursed at the federal level and state level. So, if you reduce this budget, you're only really gaining 33 cents for every dollar and it performs a very valuable function. We have never not funded this since we started it, and I think it's something that needs to be supported and continue to be supported. This, again, is another one of those status quo budgets. And I recommend tentative approval of it. The last program budget that Aaron oversees in the general fund is victims assistance. This used to be combined with the prosecution budget way back when. We separated it during, I think, Fred's tenure as DA. And it helps us track the costs associated with victims. Didn't get it confused with the number of lawyers we had and that in the prosecution budget. And now you have a clearer picture of what it and how it addresses the work that goes toward victims and victims assistance and doesn't mix it with prosecution. So they are completely separate functions. They're there for the victim. And you can see that we receive federal awards and some state revenue that fund about half of this, and the other half is funded by the county. And you can see the percentages in their pie charts of where most of their work is, what category it falls under. So those are the four budgets within the general fund for the DA that he oversees. The other budget, like I said, is CASA, which he does not oversee, but we have maintained it in the general fund. Last year, I recommended 15,000. You, in budget committee action, put $10,000 additional on the wish list for them, and then later approved, and then we adopted 25,000 for the year. This year, they're requesting 20. They actually kind of are between 20 and 25. But I put 20 down in here. I, again, am proposing 15. If they were here, which they aren't, they may show up later. They would be requesting probably 20 to 25 again. So what they will tell you is that in the past, we've tried to pay their rent, and rent is close to 25,000. But we were never supposed to subsidize them this long. When we first made the move from outside the DA, we were supposed to be at 25 and 20, then 15, and then eventually to 0. Well, eventually to 0 has never occurred. The work they do, I have to admit, is very good. And the number of causes have increased dramatically from when they first began to where they are now. They do provide a valuable service. COVID hurt them in their ability to fundraise and get donations. They do seek grants, and how well they develop those grants and are successful, I don't oversee them. So, they get what they get, but they probably never have enough money, in their opinion, because, that's what they do, and that's who they're trying to help the kids. And it's one of those for the kids type of statements. I kind of put together a budget for you. You can see how much total revenue they have. So, you know, it's your choice to add or not add to what I proposed. If you want to add, obviously it's a wish list item and we'll put it on the wish list.
I'd like to make a motion. Let's put this on the wish list. I'd like to see it stay at the $25,000 that we established last year. The COVID restrictions still and the challenges that we have in our communities financially, they're still struggling for expenses and covering their costs. So I'd like to see it kept at 25.
I'll second that. And I've talked to them as well, and the lockdowns really increased the difficulty of them doing their jobs, less eyes on those kids, less mandatory reporting. And we've seen some really tough cases. So I don't think now is a good time to reduce that. Supplement.
So you have a motion and a second. That's all it requires. It doesn't require a vote. So we will put $10,000 on the wish list because I already have the proposed 15. So that's what you're asking for. So that will get added to the wish list. I'll review that at the end of the day. They will tell you, if they were here in person, that the severity of the cases that they are dealing with is something they've never seen before. And the time involved in that severity is a lot more hands-on and a lot more effort to address what is currently out there. And I'm sure it's a function of COVID, at least partly. So, you know, we'll put the 10,000 on the wish list. If you want to tentatively approve the general fund programs, if you want to hear from Aaron, more than welcome. There will be one more fund, but I don't want to mix the general fund programs with the dedicated fund. So your choice on all of those. Aaron wants to speak. You want to speak?
Thank you very much. Excellent summation.
We tentatively approve the general fund.
Second.
All right, so the motion and second is to tentatively approve the general fund budgets for the district attorney, and being specific, that'd be for prosecution, medical examiner, support enforcement, victim assistant, and CASA.
Yeah, even though that's not under, but yeah. And then we have the $10,000 unfunded wish list.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And motion passes unanimously.
Okay, and then we have one remaining budget that is that the district attorney has oversight on it, and that's the CAMI fund. We received monies both from state operating grant, and we have a fairly healthy beginning fund balance this upcoming year because of an extension on expenditures because of COVID and everything. So we will be upping our expenditures for this fund this upcoming year. The grant's pretty much staying about the same. So the big change in expenditures and revenues in this is our beginning fund balance. A lot of our monies go toward training. They try to send local law enforcement and the sheriff's office and others to certain trainings involving domestic violence and domestic violence awareness and those kind of things. We also, and child abuse, we also send monies to Juliet's House and Liberty. Those are our two main contract service providers. We don't have, well, wait, did Liberty move into West Salem? Yeah, so we do have a location of Liberty House within the county. It used to be all on the Marion County side, but they provided services to Polk. And then Juliet's House is up in McMinnville, and they provide services to Polk. So those are the two entities that receive contract services money from the county, at least out of this fund. They also receive monies out of juvenile, or not juvenile, but community corrections for part of the community corrections allotment. Some of that money goes to or used to go to Liberty House and Juliet's. Now I think it goes to Sable. But that's the primary expenditure. There's 0.25 of FTE in here to help manage that. Might be. Is that yours? 0.25?
No, that's,
This is the core, okay. Okay. So yeah, it's a combination of FTE, but again, the only reason this budget is basically increasing is because of carryover money that we were allowed to carry over this year. So I would recommend approval of this budget, both revenues and expenditures, because it's a dedicated fund.
Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Those in favor of approving the revenues and expenses of the CAMI fund, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, you're scheduled for break, but you're probably not going to take much because we kind of just did. So we'll move on to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Carton is in attendance. Smiling all the way. The sheriff has two budgets or program budgets within the general fund. He has the patrol budget and he has the jail. He also oversees two dedicated funds, which is animal control and marine patrol. He had a third point, but that has been disbanded. It's in here for just historical purposes because I have to carry it on in the adopted budget, even though we're not approving any expenditures or anything. We've closed out that fund, but I have to carry it for 2 years on history. So the first budget that you'll look at and is the patrol budget. You can see statistics and that, crime's still out there. Drugs are still out there. There's no lack of business for the sheriff's office. So again, this is probably a status quo budget. It has some different funding resources. The sheriff was able to get a grant from the state. It was from the state, it wasn't feds, for drugs.
Yeah, the
State. So there are some new revenue sources in here for patrol. There's also some revenue resources in the jail too. But if you look at this budget, we have increase in FTE a little, but not much, just a half FTE. And then we have increases in operational costs and that. We pay for a lot of things in the sheriff's office out of here. You see big items, contracts, other public agencies. We have 911 that we pay out of here, or our portion of 911 after excise tax reduces it. We have the MDTs that they have in their cars. We have a number of contracts, priors, all that kind of stuff that is absorbed in that number. You have software and maintenance. There's an increase in that. We initiated body cams a year and a half ago, and we're switching how we're doing that, and there's an increased cost associated with that. We increased fuels and lubricants from 70 to almost a 50% increase. We have it at 100,000. That's just a hopefully good guess. We're fortunate in that a lot of the sheriff's rigs use propane. We've converted them to propane also. So that helps us somewhat, but it still doesn't eliminate the issue of higher costs. And then there's vehicle maintenance. We're getting 3 new rigs are in the budget for the upcoming year, along with vehicle setup and vehicle maintenance. We're probably on the range of needing 3 to 4 vehicles. We run probably our cars maybe just a little longer than we would like. but they're still within normal limits. But, that number probably after this year will be increased to 4 vehicles a year just to get the rotation a little quicker and a little better. Costs associated with deputies, they aren't cheap. You put a lot of investment in them. We've had issues with, or not issues, we've had the reality of state police taking 3 of our deputies in the last month and a half. They offer a lot more than we can offer in the way of wages. It will be always impossible for us to compete with them. It's a reality that the sheriff's having to deal with, and him finding recruits are getting tougher also. He used to get a lot of people applying. Now it's very thin on the amount of people applying for law enforcement jobs. Part of that is probably just how society is right now, but he, like the district attorney, and not quite as bad as the lawyer situation, finding it harder and harder to fill those open positions. They make it through testing, they get through interview, then they don't pass background, or they don't pass psych, or it's tougher and tougher as you try to ensure that you get quality employees. Other than that, this budget looks like it's growing a lot, and it is. Partly that is FTE and costs associated with those FTE, but part of it is the increase in contract services, the increase in fuel, the increase in software maintenance, all of those things. It's just being more costly to be in the law enforcement business. So, revenue wise, it looks like it's a big increase in expenditures. They've made up some of that increase in revenues. So if you look at the net at the bottom, you're going up, $300,000, which isn't that much in a $6 million budget. It's 5%. And some of these are, increases are because of those revenues. So it's within the parameters that I have in my mind all the time for budgetary increases for departments and that. The other function of the sheriff is the jail. Easy to get details and facts and numbers for the jail. They track a lot of things in the jail. Recidivism, that was another word that I used to have trouble with. That's a good one. Transactions, medical visits, everything. Obviously, the last 2 years, we've had restrictions in our jail because of COVID, and that those restrictions are loosening up quite a bit. I believe recently we're double bunking now for the first time. And again, this was best practices. These were the rules that we had to live under. It wasn't because we didn't want to hold people in jail. It was the rules of the day. And, did that help us fiscally in certain places? Yeah. We didn't have as big a food bill. We didn't have as big a medical bill. But we still had the same amount of staffing. So your cost per inmate technically was greater because you're distributing that FTE cost through, less inmates. We just got notice that our meal cost may be doubling in cost. So we're in the process of getting other quotes, but, it's a very small market for those that provide food services in jails. So, part of the increase in cost was because, we had so few inmates and they make their money at the more we have count wise and those kind of things. So they were taking it. So this is makeup. So those kind of things we're working through. I haven't increased the jail budget to address that food issue completely. You can look at all the numbers and the sheriff can talk about reasons for release, meals served, all those kind of things. This budget is going up 600,000. There are things in the jail that we're doing that are going to be hopefully unique to this year. Hopefully part of it gets spent this year in this fiscal budget, but it's looking like it's getting pushed more and more. We have to redo all the cameras and door security in our jail. It's 20 plus years old now, and that's going to be a number that could be as high as $800,000. I think the sheriff talked about it a little last year, or at least before the board on one of his monthly updates to the board. We're going to be addressing our jail software system also. So those are big expenditures that we're trying to address. You can see in special projects, the budget increased from $1,100 to $600,000. That's to address that camera and door issue. Medical care is about at $500,000. It's been reduced greatly because of the lack of numbers, but also because COVID reimbursed us for those services. So I quit having public health charge the sheriff. So he got the benefit of not having to pay for medical services, at least he pays for the hospital bills and the medications, but not the FTE providing the service. So that will change sometime during this fiscal year. That's why the number's at 500,000 lower than the 625. We also will still not be at the capacity we were. So those are the things that are happening in the jail. The sheriff and jail commander are working on those software and door and camera issues as we speak. We're getting closer to having an answer, and then I will probably modify the budget appropriately. And then on the food service, we will probably have to add monies to that line item. We just don't know what the other bids are coming in at yet. So there's a lot of things in the works. We'll probably have a better understanding in May when we meet again and a clearer picture of what we can do this current fiscal year and what we're going to end up doing in the next fiscal year to address cameras, doors, food, and software. A lot of things happening in the jail. It's that time. It's that lifespan for our jail. We put a new roof on it last year. That was 1.2 million or 1.7 million, whatever it was. It was a big number. And those kind of things. Most of our revenues, I combined the charges for services. We used to have it split between rentals and kind of miscellaneous charges for services. Put that at $520,000. That's the combined of those two. We're renting beds to Benton County and renting beds to the Sheridan Prison, the feds. The Benton County is a fixed number, and the feds out of Sheridan, they can have up to X, but when they use it, kind of just, it floats. So those are the state revenues is their share of 1145 monies, which are community corrections. So
I have a revenue question on the patrol division.
okay.
The 250K for charges for services, is that from other agencies, law enforcement agencies, or what is the source of that? Just curious.
Let me get
Back on page 4.
there you go. Come on, Sheriff. There you are. So going through the revenues on that, you have state operating grants. That is the new drug enforcement grant. In that grant, we share it with Yamhill County. It also funds a halftime, I think, in prosecution, and then the rest is absorbed within the sheriff's office. state mental health grant, that's the MCRT monies. It's not really grant. We just charge them. And we used to have MCRT, which is the Mobile Crisis Response Team. We used to have one unit that was deputy sheriff and one unit that was City of Salem. We ended the City of Salem contract at the end of March. So he will be providing both units for the Mobile Crisis Response Team. And we receive about 120,000 reimbursement from the mental health budget for those services. So that's why it doubled, because we're doing the full county now instead of sharing that with City of Salem. 10,000 is just, but most of these charges for services, they come from miscellaneous different areas. And I can get you a detail of that. I can have Caitlin pull it. She could probably pull it right now. The fines and forfeitures are a small amount. All the rest are small amounts.
Yeah.
So, but I just look at historical and how we charge those. You know, we're averaging 225 and 255. So I have that at that 250 amount. Yeah.
It looks like it's for security for football time.
Yeah.
Just random like $50 receipt.
But whatever it is, we end up getting about $250,000.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of other things that the sheriff gets, and we probably get some quarterly payments out of that too. So both the general fund budgets are, you know, they're the two biggest individual program budgets in the general fund. A majority of our public safety levy goes toward the sheriff. Approximately 24 positions are funded out of the public safety levy for law enforcement, another 5 for the DA. So it almost funds that $3 million, almost funds 30 positions for us. So that's what you have in the two program budgets within the general fund. Sheriff's here. You can ask him any questions you want, or you can tentatively approve his budget. The sheriff wants to speak.
Anybody has questions?
I'll make the motion. Tentatively approve budgets presented.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Then the sheriff oversees two individual funds. First being animal control, dog control, whatever you want to call it. It's what we do. This budget is budgeted at the same amount as last year. The only major change there isn't a change within the budget, but there's a change in scope of work. Commissioner Mordhorst asked a question during the budget message, and that if it was adequate, the general fund transferred to dog control, because we are now having to take on the City of Dallas. City of Dallas gave up their dog program April 1, March 1, somewhere in there. So now we're having to provide those services. The City of Dallas is doing some of it, but as a whole, we're the now responsible agency. We're a dog control district, so any city that chooses not to do it, we're the umbrella that takes it over. City of Salem, City of Dallas no longer do dog control. Fall City never did dog control. And so Monmouth and Independence still have their own. My guess is it won't be far down the road before we get theirs too. At which time we'll then have to address FTE, we'll have to address the whole program. We're looking at, considering having a small dog pound rather than driving over to Salem all the time to put our animals there. So there are things that we're looking at in the big picture, but right now this is a status quo budget. And the general fund transfer to this program is increased by $10,000 from 100 to 110. Obviously, if that's not enough, we make up for it during budget modifications and that. But I believe it's adequate to provide the services this upcoming year. You want to do Marine Patrol, or do you just want to do this one and then go?
Let's do this one at first. Let's do motion on animal control first, then we'll move on to marine patrol. Is there a motion to approve the revenues and expenditures of animal control?
Second.
All right, those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously.
The other fund that the sheriff oversees is the Marine Patrol Fund. This is a summer program. It's not a year-round program. So we are funded through the State Marine Board to provide this service on the Willamette River. We usually start around Memorial weekend or a little before, and then we usually go to Labor Day or a little past, depending on weather, activity, and everything. Most days during that summer period, a lot of those days, depending on weather, if it's pouring rain, not many people are out on the river, so we don't go out patrol, but a lot of it is a daily routine, definitely on the weekends. And those things, like I said, it's mostly funded by the State Marine Board. We do have a general fund transfer of $5,000. They don't cover the management services portion of this. They never have. So since its inception, we've had a general fund transfer of $3,000 to $5,000. So I have it earmarked at $5,000 for this upcoming year, and that should be provide enough for the program to work. The difficulty is trying to predict how much fuel on the river is going to cost us and those kind of things. So we may make small adjustments to this. And if it needs additional funding, we'll probably increase the general fund transfer by 5,000 or whatever. Overall, very much a status quo budget.
There a motion to approve the revenues and expenditures of the Marine Patrol?
So move.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And I'm 15 minutes ahead of schedule now.
Well done.
All righty. Step down. You want to wait, or you can do either. You're ahead of schedule now.
Yeah, let's just keep rolling.
All right. Next budget is community corrections. And the community corrections budget, they are the adult portion of parole and probation services. You can see there are two programs within the general fund that Jody oversees: community corrections and then community service. And then she oversees a separate fund, which is the juvenile fund, which we will get to a little later. So community corrections, we took, when I first started here, we ran community corrections. Then we gave it back to the state in the early 90s. And then in, I think 1997, they returned it to the county under a bill, which is known as 1145. In that bill, and maybe the only bill that has ever had this included, they guaranteed to fund community corrections at a certain level. And if they dropped below that funding level, counties could opt out and return those positions and operations to the state. They have had it all below once. Two counties, Lynn and Douglas, returned it to the state. The state found that their costs increased by 30% over what they were giving the counties. So they have never fallen below the line again for fear that they would get it back. So there are 2 counties in the state that don't have parole and probation, community corrections, and then the other 34 counties do. We are funded. There's a total pot that is determined by the state, and then that state distributes it via a formula. And it's not a population-based formula. It is a felon in custody type of formula. Our formula distribution ranges usually from about 1.5 to 1.75. And unfortunately, our number dropped from this last biennium from about 1.7 down to 1.58 or something like that, which means a reduction in revenues for those next 2 years. Even though the increases in the community corrections allocation increased, our amount remained status quo because of our drop in felony and felony percentage as a state as a whole. So this budget every 2 years goes up and down, and your funding is determined, like I said, at the state level. A distribution of our funding for 1145, a majority of it goes here, and then some of it goes to the jail because we hold 1145 prisoners or inmates. They're really not prisoners. That's more of a state pen issue in our jail. So you'll see in the jail budget, there was a revenue for 300,000. That's 1145 money. So every quarter we get this allocation from the state, 75,000 of that goes to the jail as revenue. We also receive revenue through what is called CJC, which is the Criminal Justice Commission. We have to apply for that money. We have to get it approved, both at the county level, the lip sync level, and then at the state level on your grant amounts and that. And we have that all combined in 6130 revenues for state operating grants. So that's what makes up the revenues for community correction. The budget here is a small reduction in the FTE, and the overall budget is a little less than it was last year. So caseloads got affected during COVID, obviously convictions, everything. The ability to sanction those that were on probation became difficult when you don't have the jail as your resource and your final hammer. So it's been a lot of tough work for community corrections and interactions with inmates or interactions with clients, those kind of things, especially clients that know there's really not much you can do to them. So we're getting back into a more normal activity, the jail opening up and having access to that as your final hammer will make life easier, and those kind of things. But the actual community corrections program budget is status quo. If you have questions on that, I'll answer them. The other is community service. Community service has also had difficult times during COVID, and that the ability to get inmates from the jail is non-existent. Going in and out, those kind of things. You know, getting crew leaders has been not always the easiest. Getting good crew leaders has been a little more difficult, but we're able to find those staffing positions. Right now, community service tries to maintain our parks and other things that the county has. We have reduced their workload just because of the amount of available clientele to work community service. But I see this year as getting back to more normal activity and able to address a lot of the maintenance issues, especially in our parks and in other areas. But again, this budget is about the same as last year. So both these budgets are status quo. I think next year it will be an interesting year for community corrections. 1145 and CJC were created to manage jail or prison population. The CJC specifically was to manage that through COVID and through legislation that has reduced criminalization of a lot of things. Jail or prison population is no longer a concern at the state level. They're actually closing places rather than talking about building new prisons. So I see funding for CJC, which goal is to reduce prison beds or use of prison beds, of having to morph into something else that is either prevention or recidivism related at the local level rather than addressing reducing prison population. But that's just my guess. The state will figure out what they think is best. They may reduce funding. They may do a lot of things. So this year it's a status quo budget. It's the second year of their biennium funding. So pretty easy to guess. Next year is going to be a wild guess.
There a motion to approve the budgets of parole, probation, and community service?
Also move.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, the next budget is not a general fund budget. It is the juvenile fund. Jody oversees the juvenile fund and juvenile probations. You have 3 programs in the juvenile fund. One is the major is probations. The other program is sanctions. And that is where we pay for our detention beds. We contract with Yamhill County for detention beds. And then the last is juvenile community service, which basically just pays the adult for the services they provide. We have a juvenile crew that goes out and picks up garbage along the state highways. They get contracts for that. So the juvenile fund does receive a large general fund transfer. This year, I'm proposing $800,000 for the general fund transfer. So that is up $30,000 from last year. You have FTE wise, the same amount of FTE. It's been this number for probably a decade. We have newer staff over there than we had. We used to have one of the longest tenured staff over there, but Matt stole one of them, Wendy, and another one of our long-time employees left the county and is working closer to home. She commuted from Staten every day. She probably finally got tired of that, and she's performing a job over in that area where life's a little easier on the commute and everything. So, but overall, program's going well. The new people seem to be working very good. This again, like I said, is basically a status quo budget. And again, a majority of its funding is from the state or from the county through general fund transfer. We get a small state operating grant, which fluctuates in dollars, but it stays around the 150 to 160 range. The other program sanctions, this primarily is contract services. We have never owned our own facility. At one time, detention facility. At one time, we contracted with both Marion County and Polk County and Yamhill County. We used to contract one bed over at Marion County to make it easier on Salem to transport to there. And then a majority of our beds have always been in Yamhill. They operate two different types of detention facilities. Yamhill operates more of a boot camp type of facility. Marion County operates a more lax facility. Judges would often tell me, yeah, I know where that, without knowing who he was talking to, where that juvenile was being housed. You could just tell by how they responded and how they were functioning in those type of things. So we contract 4 beds approximately at Yamhill County. Juvenile beds are a lot more expensive than adult beds. There's a lot more requirements that go with juvenile beds. The staffing level is 1 to 8 at the juvenile level. At the county level, I think it's 1 to 30 if you operate it right. You have to also provide an educational component and some other things. So the cost of a juvenile bed is about $150 to $160 a day. An adult bed is $80 to $100 a day. So it's almost twice as much to house a juvenile. So that's where we pay for those functions. You see a general fund transfer there. Part of our levy goes toward that. We put 1 detention bed in there as a component of our operating levy. So part of this transfer comes from the operating levy. It's the only one that's outside the general fund that receives monies. And then the last program is juvenile community service. And you're going to get about $45,000 that they contract because the staffing and everything shows up in the general fund adult community service. One of those guys takes juveniles out, picks up garbage, does those things, and then juvenile reimburses them. So you have like I said, a pretty much a status quo budget. It's up 15,000 from a year ago, which is nothing. I'd recommend tentative approval of both the revenues and expenditure.
Can I ask a
Yep.
big question? A while back when you were talking about the CASA program, you mentioned that there were some things going through that you'd never seen before. And I'm wondering, are we going to see some concomitant things happen in juvenile and so forth, kind of a bulge going through the system as the COVID thing works through?
Ask the professionals or the people that are dealing with the young youth today. I would guess that Brent would come in here and tell you that his school-based health counselors are dealing with things that they've never dealt with before.
I'm not surprised.
Either in the lack of preparation for the youth coming into the school or their ability to function socially in the school. They are not at the same level as pre-COVID. How those youth, which are in the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade area, how they adjust post-COVID, and most of the juvenile issues occur in junior high and early high school. So they haven't graduated yet to juvenile. Whether that adjustment can occur prior to them there, don't know. Matt used to be a juvenile counselor, and I don't know if he would even know the answer, but
I forgot everything.
but you have less police presence in schools. They don't have resource officers anymore in schools. Did that help or hurt? Don't know. It increased the volume in juvenile because schools tended to ship everything to juvenile if there was even a fight in the school. That was criminal, send it to juvenile. So you got artificially high numbers going to juvenile because of schools not wanting to deal with it anymore. So it's a good question. It's one that I don't think anyone has the answer to right now. You know, you want more, Brent could probably talk about what his school-based health counselors are going through. I can bring Jody in or one of our, you, oh. You can talk. I don't know if we have the answer.
So, no, we don't, I mean, as far as what's going to happen in the future, no, obviously not. But what we are finding is that the reduction of school resource officers has shown a reduction in referrals that we've received. And so from out of those areas, what we are finding is once we do receive a referral, it is at a higher criminal level. So it's taking longer for them to get to us. So they're a little bit more wild before we can actually intervene. So obviously, if we have them on the lower level, we can intervene faster and potentially divert them from future criminal activity. So that's what we're seeing right now. And then there's the obvious loss of attendance in the schools. And, you know, some of our families have struggles getting their kiddos to school. And so those kiddos are the ones that we're finding that are just at higher risk. So. But our referrals are actually just now picking back up, but they are low, and that can be seen based off of where a school resource officer is or is not. So.
Any further discussion? All right. Is there a motion to approve tentative
I'll move.
second?
Revenues and expenditure.
Net revenues and expenditures for juvenile probation, juvenile sanctions, and juvenile community service. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And motion passes unanimously.
And in this section, at least in my book, management shows up here. They aren't in the juvenile fund, but that's okay. That works. I think that's the next one on the list. Emergency management is in the general fund. Managed by Dean Bender. Not well on the fiscal side, but everything else pretty good. I have to bail him out all the time. It's okay. And plus he's in Hawaii right now, so I'm gonna abuse him horribly, so.
Is there another position that we need to appoint somebody to? Because again,
Well, we put it back to juvenile department.
So, but emergency management, is, again, it is a wild guess when we're dealing with emergency management. Because Dean is very good at securing grants. And when those grant opportunities come up, we never completely know. Some are pretty scheduled, but others, you know, they just pop up and he applies and he tends to get money. He also has a pretty good in at the state and has the ability, when they have extra money, he'll just raise his hand and they give him some extra money. So we get this money coming in, and then sometimes it's in one budget year, so it looks like he's done a really good job, but then all the expenditures occur the next fiscal year. And then he looks like he did a really bad job. So I mean, it's a flow. It's a system that continues to work. Some of our big issues, or not issues, but projects they're taking on right now at emergency management. We're, as part of the American Rescue Funds, we're upgrading our whole emergency communication system. It's going to cost us probably between 1.8 and $2 million. We will be moving law enforcement to an all digital level, and then analog will still stay at the fire level. And that when you make that move, it has to be all or nothing. So most of the radios that are being bought today are dual. They have the ability to be converted to digital and that, but that's probably his biggest project that he's working on. We've just updated the emergency management plan currently working on ASA, which is ambulance service area. We're in the process of sending out an RFP to consultants to address our ambulance service delivery areas. We currently have 7 in the county, maybe 8. And we're relooking at that. We actually have 2 new providers. One is providing that service via contract for West Valley, their ASA, which is the Grand Ronde Tribe. Southwest Polk Fire has a new ambulance service. They do not have an assigned area, and we're working through that to try to see if we can adjust our boundaries for ambulance service delivery and those kind of things. And that's part of what we're doing through a consultant to, hopefully we get a consultant to address those issues. Those are probably the 2 biggest projects that Dean will be working on, along with the normal emergency management. Knock on wood, we didn't have any real major floods or storm events this year. Hopefully we don't have a wildfire or a flood or any of those things, but we're in pretty good shape. The new EOC works well as a meeting place. We haven't had to really gear it up for an emergency, and it'd be nice if we never had, but that's a pipe dream, I'm sure. So, but I would recommend tentative approval of the expenditures for emergency management.
Is there a motion?
Also move. Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
So now I'm 40 minutes ahead. Have you ordered food yet?
Yeah.
Okay,
Is it all right if we take a break?
Yeah.
Like there.
and then I would suggest we do
Parks.
parks and then maybe non-departmental.
Perfect. All right, let's reconvene in about 10 minutes. Mr. Hanson, I believe we're talking about parks.
Yes, we are. And normally parks is a very little budget. This year, it's a very large budget. As a result of the new activity at Buena Vista. All of our other parks obviously are in a status quo position. I handed out a diagram of the majority of the work that they're going to be doing at Buena Vista Park. When it's all said and done, I believe it'll be a very nice place to put your boat in, put your kayak in, put whatever you are into the river. It will work quite well. They anticipate this work all being accomplished by September, October of this year. So
This year.
yeah, they've already started. We've ordered the dock and the planking and all that stuff already. Contractor will start. We already have the contractor selected. It's Carter and Son, and they built a bridge for us back in OTIA time. But they will begin around the 1st of June.
So what kind of dock are they putting in?
Floating dock that is, the one they had out there was ancient,
Yeah.
and that this dock's gonna cost about $150,000 when it's all said and done. So, but we had to order it now so we can get it delivered in time.
You hope.
Yeah, it probably won't be here for the boating season as construction's occurring, but it might make the tail end. Other than that, and this at least 1.5 million that I have budgeted, this is a status quo. Most of the park's maintenance is performed by adult community corrections, community service. So, and if the sheriff has enough inmates, we usually use a crew to out of the jail to do our parks. So I would recommend tentative approval of this budget with the grant.
Move to
move.
TA. Oops,
We have a second.
second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Why don't we move on to non-departmental? We have there's two parts to the non-departmental. Well, actually, there's four parts to the non-departmental. The first part is in the upper part of the budget. You have approximately $6,500 of program budgets. This is board and commissions expenses, community mediation and VORP, miscellaneous expenses. Those are just catch-alls for when we put on a meeting or something like that. I think the budget lunch comes out of here, those kind of things. The way to track that. We also have $3,000 of non-departmental money that goes to VORP, which is Mr. Braun provides that service, and we've used it for community mediation, neighbor disputes, those kind of things. You would tentatively approve just the 6,500. We will later approve the transfers and the contingency. Right now, you would tentatively approve this 6,500, then we'll move on to the Title III money.
There a motion to approve the expenditures of the non-departmental budget.
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
See, there's that word.
Man, getting me again.
All right, the next one in the non-departmental is Title III money. We spend this money primarily on search and rescue and fire prevention. Then we were allowed to then spend it again on forest patrol and that. That is what we have been spending on the last few years. However, this year, due to staffing shortages, and no one in the sheriff's office wanting that assignment, we've ended our forest patrol for now. The goal is to start that up when we can convince somebody to take on that position. The person we had in that position was one of those three that got scooped up by state police. So all the timber companies that contribute 50% to this position have been notified. And I kept it in the budget just in case we have it. If not, we will have to find another way to spend our Title III money. Other than that, it's purely status quo.
Is there a motion to approve the expenditures of Title III?
So,
Do I have a second? Second. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, what do you want to do next? You won't do Austin because he'll probably want to at least watch. Let's go to miscellaneous funds. And we'll knock off a bunch of them. No one cares about them anyway, really. The first one we have is the insurance fund. County pays for property liability, cybersecurity, workers' comp. Well, workers' comp is actually paid by the individual funds. Primarily property liability and cybersecurity that we pay for out of here. There is some workers' comp that we pay that is for our retro program. So the individual departments fund this insurance fund, but we pay workers' comp out of this fund. And then health insurance premiums, we have people that retire early and take county insurance. So we pay their premium and they reimburse us. So that's why you see charges for services paying for a lot of this stuff. So those are the three elements that we primarily pay for. There's a fund contingency of $200,000 is probably, we've been put on notice that the current cybersecurity insurance provider will not provide cybersecurity. So CIS is in the process of, and that's who we get our insurance from, in the process of trying to find a new provider. Cybersecurity is a very relevant thing. I think Tillamook got hammered for about 4 months. They couldn't use their computers. And didn't have insurance. Lynn County just got hacked. And they're the most recent one that I know of. There's been 4 or 5 other counties. We've had some get close, but our systems that we have in place prevented any kind of real attack. But it's real, it's out there. We are continually beefing up our security, our firewalls, all those things, our monitoring. But it can shut you down. And if they pick the right time, it can shut you down and force you to pay. That's the problem. But this is where we pay all of our insurances. It's, again, a status quo budget. Property insurance and liability insurance continue to go up. We're in the CIS pool. Some counties don't do a good job and have caused that pool rates to rise because of lack of performance. So, but it's the only one in town for us, basically. They are the only one that's willing to write insurance for jails. So we're kind of stuck with CIS. And even if there were other options, we're probably going to stay with CIS because that's AOC rules. And you're part of AOC, you have to belong to CIS. We used to get away with just being property, but now we're almost everything. So,
Ms. Chance, I got a question. Our cost for insurance is going up 10%. Does that include the CIS or the cybersecurity when they find that, or is that going to be above the 10% increase we're experiencing already?
I put a cushion in there. Cybersecurity is just part of their package, but I don't know what that's going to do. We haven't got the rates for next year. So my guess is the cybersecurity won't cost that much more, but to qualify for it will cost a lot. I mean, not cost a lot more. Will be more stringent, so less people will have it. That's the unfortunate thing. The requirements that they had under the old system were pretty light. And as a result, I think they lost money and so they just got out of it. They're seeking another carrier. My guess is the prerequisite to get that insurance is going to be very stringent. And we might have to do some upgrades in that. Those upgrades are already in Josh's budget though. So we just may have to speed that up a little, but I don't think it's going to cost that much more of the insurance. It's going to cost that much more to be prepared and qualify for that insurance. And that'll show up in IS, not in here.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussions? Is there a motion to tentatively approve the expenditures of the insurance fund?
So moved.
Oh, and revenues. Thank you. Revenues and
I'll
expenses.
second that.
Those in favor of tentatively approving revenues and expenditures of the insurance fund, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
The next budget is the county school budget. It controls this one. It's hers. We receive utility franchise tax in lieu of they have 2 methodologies they can use. They pick and choose the one that costs them the least. That money then gets sent to the county. We pass it through to the state because the state controls all state school funding. So basically, we're a pass through. This is old legislation that it occurred way back when, and they've really never changed it. It is 160,000. Sometimes when they change their methodology, it will change and then it stays that way for 5 or 7 years. Then they switch to the other one. But it's just a pass through, and bottom line, we try to budget more than we know we're going to get in, so we don't have to do budget adjustments or budget supplemental budgets. So it averages around 150 to 155. So revenues and expenditures, like I said, are just a pass through.
Is there a motion to tentatively approve revenues and expenditures of the county school fund?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Next one is law library. The law library is a statutory requirement for counties. Now that you can get everything almost online, don't know why we're in the business, but we are. So our law library is located in the basement of the historic courthouse. It requires a general fund transfer because between the management services charges we charge and the dues and memberships and publications, it's mainly publications we pay for, we end up transferring $10,000 to $20,000, actually 10 to 15. I increased it to 20 because I'm tired of doing budget adjustments for 2,300 at the end. So we'll just transfer 20,000 and try to build a beginning fund balance so we can even that back out. But it's something where we're required to do. We staff it at the most minimal level. Some counties have a full-time staff that operates their law library. Have, a whole bunch of square footage dedicated to it and that. Others have contracted that service out. So I don't think anyone wants to be in Polk County, the law library service. So, but
That service utilized at all?
we have a gentleman that routinely utilizes it. And we have one that is a constant, and we probably have 2 others throughout the year. And they go in and they're there for an hour or 2 and then never see them again.
Got it.
And we also buy publications and that for the jail through here too. Those inmates who have more time on their hand tend to use it and file little complaints or briefs and all those kind of things. Some of them are very good. They're good jailhouse lawyers, and others can't even decipher them. But so it funds more than just the pure law library, but it is what it is.
Is there a motion to tentatively approve both expenditures, the revenues and expenditures of the law library fund? Do I have a second?
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Next one is the court security fund. This was created back 20 years ago now. And it used to be funded much better than it used to be. And then over time, the state kind of removed parts of that funding and everything. And it's primarily supposed to be used for court security and things for the courts. By law, we're required to provide courts courtroom space rent-free. So all the space that they have in this building, the historic building, and over at the jail are rent-free, and we pay for everything associated with it. Electricity, janitorial, all that stuff. If they need, certain things during COVID and that, they bought a bunch of large screen TVs and those kind of things. They don't have it in their budget. It comes out of here. We've bought metal detectors out of here. We've done some security upgrades out of here. But that's what this fund is dedicated for. Coordinate with the judge as much as possible, or we just do it. It works. They request things, but funding used to be a lot bigger than it was, and that eroded over time. Again, you can see it's reducing itself a little, but it's pretty much status quo. So I would recommend tentative approval, both revenues and expenditures. You got food?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a motion to tentatively approve revenues and expenditures of the Court Security Fund?
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Break for lunch, Mr. Chair.
Let us adjourn for lunch. We'll reconvene, I believe, at 1 o'clock. Order, I know that
Assistant head coach.
Mr. Hawkins and Mr. Hanson have some meetings that they need to get to, so let's get started.
That does, I don't. I'll get over it.
We'll get it done. Let's go.
So do you want to finish miscellaneous funds and then do community development, or do community development
Well,
and the rest of
we-
miscellaneous funds?
We skipped over community development because Austin wasn't available, wasn't it?
You know, Austin, oh, you can handle it. You went upstairs. Not. No, what-
And critique.
And critique.
Make
that's-
facial expressions.
Let's do community development so we can get Austin the heck out of here so we don't have to interrupt his
He won't,
day.
so he won't heckle us, huh?
That's right. So in the community development tab, you have three, well, actually, you have two general fund programs. You have planning and environmental health. And then Austin oversees the building inspection fund, is part of the economic development fund and household hazardous waste fund. So we'll do the first two programs, which are the general fund programs. Planning, as you can see, they have a number of descriptive stats, and that life up there has been very busy as new growth occurs and all that. People are wanting to do different things with their property and trying to maximize what they can do with their property. So planning has been steady and busy. You can see on page 2, his budget is got additional FTE in planning. Basically, we allocate positions all over where Austin's very good at determining where his needs are and shuffling his people around. Almost all of his people are cross-trained in some way, shape, or form, at least in the clerical staff, and that on how to address things. The materials and services portion is pretty much status quo. This budget, even though it's $50,000 greater than last year, is, again, like I said, it's a status quo budget. Revenues are pretty much the same as they were last year, just a slight increase. And the impact of the general fund is about $45,000 greater than it was a year before. Planning is a program that will never pay for itself, no matter how many efforts Austin tries to make. It is just one of those that doesn't pay for itself unless we just really cranked up our fees and that, which isn't really appropriate and doesn't help economic development or any growth in the county. So planning is that budget. Environmental health is the other program within the general fund. They do more activity because of building in that with on-site sewage applications. Food service facilities obviously took a downturn during COVID. Things are kicking back up, and that growth is back to almost pre-COVID numbers, or anticipated to be at pre-COVID numbers. by the end of next fiscal year. All the other things you can look at are slight growth or pretty much status quo. This budget has a slight, well, not anything in FTE, it's basically the same. Small difference in total costs associated with that. You have a small increase in materials and services, mostly because of management services. This is a truly status quo budget. Revenue wise, a little greater than it was the previous year. And total cost to the county is $60,000-$70,000. This is one that once you get to, back to full license, and that almost pays for itself. So they do a very good job of trying to have that pay for itself or even make a little money, which we're supposed to put back into the program. Correct? See, that was good. So those are the two general fund programs. Building inspection used to be in the general fund. We made it its own dedicated fund 2 years ago. So that one is outside the general fund. So I would request that you tentatively approve both the environmental health and planning budgets.
I've got a question for Austin. In your statistics, you have an increase in complaints by 4 for this next year. Is there a reason for that, or how do we sign up?
I think people are a little bit, are ready to be more ornery and critical after the pandemic. And so we anticipate a factor of less than 0.1% or 4 complaints.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Is there a motion to tentatively approve the budgets for planning and environmental health?
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
The next program budget is building inspection. Like I said, we created its own fund approximately 2 years ago. You can see from the statistics that building permits were probably at the peak in 2021, but they have held fairly steady. That indication also occurs in the assessor office with new growth and all that. So, we're anticipating this next year to be not that much different than the current year. FTE wise, I think a slight reduction in allocated FTE, shifted some of that to planning and those kind of things. You have, because it's its own dedicated budget, we've built a contingency in this fund now. They collect more revenues than they're expending currently. As a result, we will continue to build that contingency. And then once we get to a certain level, we'll have to figure out how to address that and that. But I think an ideal, personally for me, ideal contingency for this department is probably close to $250,000, so doubling the current contingency. We eventually have to have a downturn or a slowing, at least in the building area. And that will help us absorb when things aren't as nice as they are now, at least in this fund. In the past, we have, historically, I did a 12-year running total of the building inspection fund. At times, general funds used to subsidize it as much as $100,000, $200,000. And at times it made $100,000 or $200,000. So it's hard to guess. It's a roller coaster. We've been on a pretty high uptick lately. So eventually that uptick has to go downward. So having an adequate contingency, and I wouldn't even be scared if that contingency got to $300,000 or $350,000. Once we get to its operating level though, then we have to figure out how to give back, figure out a slowdown in those fees that we are collecting. So, you know, I would recommend tentatively approving both the revenues and expenditures, noting that you do have a $125,000 contingency in this program.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
So the next fund is the Economic Development Fund. Right now I have 500,000 as the beginning fund balance. I anticipated probably that number would probably change between now and May. It depends on how much of the broadband projects and that we get invoiced for this fiscal year. Like I said, we received approximately $1.6 million from Senator Boquist as an allocation for our broadband project. The remainder of that shows up in ARPA funds. The total price that we approved in areas of upgrades, I think ended up being $2,050,000 roughly. So we have MyNet and Lyrica both providing us services. We're addressing areas northwest of Dallas, southwest of Dallas, doing a small study in Falls City to find out what it takes to bring them up to speed. And then we're doing a area to the southeast in the Rick Rial Fairgrounds, that area. Those are our 4 project areas, with the minor one being a study in Falls City. The upgrades will be northwest, southwest, and southeast of Dallas. So addressing a lot of the needs that through surveys and that we needed for broadband upgrade. And like I said, that beginning fund balance number could go from 500 to $1 million, like that, depending on invoices from our broadband project. Other than that, there's pretty much status quo in the economic development. Every year we budget 700,000. Every year we spend 0 because we don't. It's just a placeholder for a community development block grant that may or may not exist. This fund had a lot of expenditures during COVID. We got business relief grants that we put in economic development. The first one we got initially in the end of calendar year 2020 was about 1.2 million, which we distributed to businesses for their impacts of COVID on their businesses. I think our grants ranged from $25,000 to a minimum of $5,000. The only exception to the minimum of $5,000 was if you requested only $3,000, you got $3,000. I didn't give you $5,000. So we got that money out. It was closer to 1.3 million. We got that money out in a timely fashion prior to the end of calendar year 2020. Then we received a second round of funding in approximately May of 2021 as a result of the 6 or 7 day shutdown that the governor imposed for a short week. She promised relief to those counties, those certain counties, and then quickly the relief was lifted, but she made the promise, so she had to give us money. So we got about 680,000 there. It took us 2 rounds to distribute that money, but we had another process, and we did approximately 75 businesses during that process, and then another 15 to expend all those monies. So in total, we did almost $1.9 million of business relief money to the general public. And then on top of that, with some CRF money, we also boosted up the childcare industry outside of that. So in all total, private businesses got about $2.1 million through business relief and that. The only exception was we allowed nonprofits on the second round of the last funding. So some nonprofits got some money, but before that, it was private business owners that qualified. You had to be in good standing and some other things with taxes and business licenses and those. But I think the first time we had 220 applicants, 20 of them were outside the county. Their business was in Marion. So Marion had their own money. I think we ended up giving about 182 businesses money that time, another 70. So in total, we helped over 250 businesses with this money. So some of it showed up here and some in CRF. A bulk of it showed up here. So wanted to let you know that economic development, at least during COVID, we did I think a very good job of getting that money out to the public and to the businesses that were still impacted by those. Your biggest receiver of monies tended to be restaurants, who were probably the most severely impacted. The next line of people that were impacted tended to be barbershops and beauty parlors because of the close down, at least in the initial one. And then the 6th day, they got hammered again. So those were your two biggest sectors that either applied or qualified. So other things we do in economic development, we pay for a trapper. We pay for other things, sometimes depending on if they have adequate money or not. We pay for the Aurora station in Extension. Right now it's in here. I'm making sure Extension has adequate funding in their budget, which you don't need to worry about, but my board eventually has to worry about. So we balance between here and there, but overall it's pretty much a status quo. The broadband's the new flavor of the year for this fund, and we'll get that expensed on the proper broadband services. So if you have any questions, I would recommend tentative approval of both revenues and expenditures in EcoDevo.
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
The last one is Household Hazardous Waste Fund. This was set up way back when to dedicate funding to household hazardous waste. Funding revenue generated from this is through the franchise taxes that are associated with your waste bill that you receive at home. This fund has peaked at getting a lot of money, and now we've been spiraling down. We have never adjusted the franchise rate. I think I talked about it a little as on a death spiral for this fund. Austin and I have talked about it multiple times. We were going to propose raising the rates, but during COVID, it didn't time out real well. We will probably be having discussions during this fiscal year with the board, required public hearings and all those things to probably look at doubling or almost tripling the rate. The rate that we currently have is what, 25 cents? So when we double it to 50 cents, it's not going to break most people's back, but we just didn't want to impose higher fees during COVID and have people experience that. So to be adequately funded, we probably need to be somewhere between 50 and 75 cents. So, we'll probably go before the board, starting out at 50 with the idea that, 2 or 4 years later, we'll probably go to 75. With the reduction in funding that we've had, events that we used to put on in that or collaborate with Marion County have diminished, but it's still active.
And are these households who are charged outside UGBs, or is this everybody?
I believe it's
everybody,
everybody.
inside and outside urban growth boundaries.
Thank you.
There a motion to approve revenues and expenses of the household hazardous waste budget?
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Any more questions of Austin? Theories on life, everything?
Laura gave me some expert advice this morning on what a true businessman budget proposal looks like, and I hope I passed the test.
You did an excellent job.
What is it?
I'd rather not say, but Commissioner Morgors tested me on it in this meeting, and,
Okay,
and so I followed the advice that he gave.
okay,
Very well.
fair enough. You're coachable. All right. Hi there. All right, so if you want to move to the miscellaneous funds,
Yes, I think we left off at domestic mediation is where.
domestic mediation is where we did leave off. Domestic mediation is one of those funds that was created during the legislative period. We started in 2002, 2003. I think we had 3 new funds that occurred during that time period. A very small budget. It basically pays for domestic mediation services. It's a lot of the money is, how do I want to word it? A lot of this activity is conducted by the courts. Every Tuesday or Wednesday. Classes used to be Tuesday afternoon, but the how to get divorced with children class that you're required to go to is basically what this pays for. We pay for outside presenters or mediators or whatever to conduct those classes. The courts kind of handle all that and then invoice us for those individuals, and then we pay for them that are providing the service to this budget. You can see that we work with about a $20,000 beginning fund balance. State operating grant is about $38,000 to $40,000, and then we have a small $5,000 transfer. Sometimes it's zero, sometimes it needs a boost, and then we whittle it down. And so, but right now it's only a $5,000 budget that or transfer we're proposing. So I would recommend that you approve both expenses and revenues.
There a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. This is a big fund. So in the spring of 2021, as you remember, we talked about this during this time period. We created the fund and allocated it in the approved budget in the May hearings, and then later adopted it in the June hearings. This is the second year of this fund that's being proposed. We will have received all our funding by the time this budget takes place. So as you can see, we had $16.8 million over 2 years that we received funding. The budget for this is 12.2 million. And we may adjust the beginning fund balance again. I don't know certain expenditures. We've signed POs for communications upgrade of about 1.1 million. I don't know when that allowed us to order supply chain wise, and that I don't know when those things are coming in and when we have invoices. So you may see an increase in beginning fund balance or a decrease. This is my best guess right now, but we will modify that as the year progresses. You can see that we're going to have in contingency about 5.3 million. We have some transfers to building improvement fund, public works construction fund, and public works fund. And then you have buildings, anticipation that there's a good chance we may end up building a building with this monies for family and community outreach. We're in the process of trying to make something work in the S curves in between Monmouth and Independence. Technically, I believe it's Monmouth is, yeah, but it's real close. It's a tweener property. And we would then be relocating Family and Community Outreach, which is Brent DeMoe's program, over to the Monmouth Independence area. And then that would free up space for my ever-growing behavioral health, so they can be all housed in the Academy building with the exception of the Wells Fargo building, which I am in the process of purchasing. But that's still a block away from Academy. So it would provide much needed relief in space, service delivery wise for Family and Community Outreach being over there in the S curves. About 60% of their clients are from that area. And Monmouth and Independence, at least the cities have been requesting more services over there. We just started up some additional services over there. It made the IO, but by relocating over there, you'll probably have a greater impact on that community to facilitate the things that Brent does. And Brent has a little of everything going on. And if you don't know Brent real well, he's always going, and so is his staff. And he's been a great addition to Polk County and service delivery model and delivering services to community members. But we would also house some other entities there, make it more of a one-stop shop, and hopefully make that service delivery much better and more inclusive of those that are using the most services over there. So that would be one of our big projects in using these funds. I have here a list of things that I'm kind of tracking. I am tracking, and not more than kind of tracking, but we've done some things. We remodeled the Academy building gym into conference space and outreach and those kind of things. We've given Public Works some relief for lost revenue. That was one of the acceptable areas that you could provide monies to. The building and fund, we're going to have to be upgrading. We're going to upgrade the HVAC in this complex. We're also going to be upgrading HVAC over at the jail. We'll be upgrading HVAC over at the Academy. All those much improved air quality is an acceptable payment under that. I've already mentioned broadband and emergency communications. We're doing a countywide water resource planning project. Austin and Commissioner Pope are spearheading that to look at water needs throughout the county and water rights and all those things. That with $250,000 study that will involve all the players involving water, including cities. We've put money into childcare. We recently opened up an employee-only childcare area in the Academy building. It began April 1st, and that is looking like, so far, after 4 days, being very successful. Heard feedback from a couple of our employees.
So it's all Polk County employees?
Are eligible. Obviously, I'm not, because
No, but I mean.
Ryan doesn't need it anymore.
All Polk County employees can utilize it.
Have access to it. Some were able to start immediately that are looking for childcare. Others probably were already in existing contracts.
So they're all-
And will make a move come the summer or whatever when they need it again. But, you know, it's a pilot. It's one of the greatest needs that employees need today. And it also helps get employees back into the job if that kind of
Well, and the other,
childcare is available.
the other thing it does is gives you a potential leg up on recruiting
Yes.
employees also.
That's right. So, you know, we're doing it for the benefit of our employees, but it's somewhat selfish in that
Yeah.
it's a recruiting tool, it's a retention tool, it's a whole bunch of tool. So we're trying to maximize that. I think it's going to end up being successful, but we're 4 or 5 days into
Is
it.
this one of Brent's ideas?
I I would say Brent was part of it. Commissioner Pope has always been stressing this and proposing this in the Willamette Jobs Council and those kind of things.
Workforce
as-
development issue.
And workforce development as one of the big things that employers are gonna have to address because it's tough. There isn't adequate childcare needs, there isn't adequate housing. I mean, but this is one we felt we could, bite off and make work. And right now the employees are loving that, they know where their kid is. They have access on an app on their phone to check it out now and then. They're close in case anything happens. It saves travel. I mean, there's an ease so far.
Right.
So that's one of the things we've been putting in. We're going to put some money into infrastructure out at the Grand Ronde Sanitary District. That's one that I've been interim manager for 24 years, maybe 25, longest interim manager in the history of Oregon, I think. But we're going to do that. We have some money at least set aside for Falls City is doing a major wastewater upgrade to their facility. Whether they're able to find all the adequate funding they're hoping to find is unknown. I have a placeholder for them for some money. And the reason Falls City we have as a placeholder is most counties or cities like Dallas got 2.8 million or maybe even 3 million. Monmouth and Independence got 1.9 and 2.1. Falls City got $200,000 because they're small and that's what small ones qualified for, and they can't afford the things that they really need to do. So we're trying to assist that community if needed. And they're working on all their funding methodologies and resources, and they're getting more and more successful. So that need may not occur or may occur, but we have a placeholder for that. Fairgrounds got some lost revenue, which we already put back into facilities. We'll upgrade the HVAC out there in 2 or 3. We're getting bids on that right now. We put money into cybersecurity. It's unnecessary evil in today's world. We're allocating about 150 to 200,000 a year just to beef up firewalls and all those things and increase your level of security on your stuff. We have put some money into, originally we were going to put an additional mobile crisis team together. Right when we began that for 1 month, I think this last March, we decided to sever our ties with City of Salem for their MCRT. So that moved from ARPA into just the sheriff's office. So we're not utilizing any monies for those positions for MCRT. We have put some additional counselors in the schools to address just the needs that are in there, with the understanding that we will pay for it the first year, we will partially pay for it the second year, and the third year school is year on year. You're going to need to backfill and completely fund this, and they're all okay with that. So we jump-started it because of the immediate need, and hopefully it will continue forward. And then, as I said, we put management services overhead monies in here. So we have allocated tentatively somewhere around 15 million of our 16.8. We have flexibility to put it into other things still, and there are plenty of areas that you can put it into. They relaxed the rules on the original, so Polk County can put it into anything we want, the first 10 million, and then the other 6.8 have to follow the rules. We already have plenty of things that follow the rules, so our flexibility on this last 1.5 to 1.8 million is pretty free. So that's it in a nutshell. If you want to see my chicken scratching that, you can. It's here. It's getting modified about once every month and a half because we think of things or, things change and we find other funding. At one time, Polk City was hoping for as much as 2 million. We only earmarked 500,000 for them. Now that numbers, they may not need it at all. So it's a moving target, moving budget. We have until December of 24 to spend it all. So, and that's without extensions, which they may or may not grant. We're not counting on it. We anticipate it being spent by the 24-25 fiscal year and not having to run up against that threshold. So, but this is money we didn't ask for. Is it going to benefit the county? Yeah, it's going to benefit infrastructure a lot on things we wouldn't have been able to do. I would have never been able to put 1.8 million into emergency communications. And that just doesn't benefit Polk County. I mean, government, it benefits all the fire, ambulance, cities, law enforcement, everybody. And taking that burden off them because they would have had to pony up too. So we're covering all those expenses. They're having to upgrade some of their radios and that, but we're talking $20,000 and $30,000 ARPA expenditures, not $1.8 million ARPA expenditures. So, if we build a building that will help us infrastructure wise, obviously the broadband is something we did during COVID relief and then continued it on through ARPA. Childcare we've been working on with for the last 2 or 3 years. So a lot of things allowing us to continue. Nothing that should cost us reoccurring costs though, after this money is gone. And obviously our buildings will be in better shape. Our infrastructure with communications and broadband and all that will be in better shape. So not trying to spend monies on reoccurring costs. Management services will taper it down after this. And so we're trying to utilize it the best we can. And that's been the direction from the budget committee and the board all along. So that's our goal. And I'll give you a better update in May. But I would recommend expenditures and revenues in the amount of what, 12,200,000.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
So the next two little items in this tab are point and debt service. Point, we zeroed out this current fiscal year. This is just history. Debt service, we're transferring the remaining monies in debt service to Public Works. This is monies left over from the 2006 road bond. We quit collecting taxes in 2016, but there's a lag in late payments and that. This is what's left over. We closed this debt service fund out and we'll move that money to Public Works because that was its intent originally. And we'll put it in Public Works to address roads and road maintenance. So we're keeping with what this money was collected for. So don't have to do anything on that because there is no budget allocation or so. Miscellaneous funds are done, and now you have the fairgrounds. I don't know if Tina planning on showing up or not, but she was happy when I told her that I would do it, so she most likely will not show up. You have two program budgets within the fair and revenues for the fair. Revenues are being proposed at $707,000. General fund transfers at 200,000, was 190 this current year. There is the revenue that I talked about earlier that may show up between now and May, which is approximately 280,000. If we do indeed receive that money, we will put it into revenues, obviously, but we'll also put it into special projects or something that involves infrastructure. It will not go into people or awards or whatever. It'll go back into the nuts and bolts of the fairgrounds. And my guess is that money would be earmarked for upgrade to the asphalt and pavement and paths out there, which is in very much need of repair. So I've told Tina that. I think she is more than fine with that. We're in the process of upgrading roofs on a lot of our barns and those kind of things. Most of that work will get done this fiscal year. Some of it will get done next fiscal year. I've already allotted for that in this budget. The annual fair, requires very little general fund transfer, but we usually operate in a deficit. So basically the general fund transfer you make to the year-round operations covers the annual fair. The annual fair rarely pays for itself. It's a victim of obviously attendance, but the weather influences it dramatically. Obviously COVID affected it even more dramatically. I think this next fair will be almost back to normal. I think they're adding a half day, I think, on Wednesday.
Yep.
Yep. And then I think, they're doing some other things. But, I will never tell you that the fair is going to pay for itself, the actual fair. I believe it has once in my career. So that's not a good track record so far.
When I was on the fair board.
It might have been. but
Well
a
played,
lo-
sir. Well played.
But a lot of things have to line up also.
Yeah, that's big
Yeah,
difference.
you have to have good weather. If it's 100 degrees, you can't win. If it's raining, you can't win. If you get 80-degree weather and clear skies and everyone's enjoying the outside and that, you have some decent entertainment, but you have a rodeo, you have this, you have that. You can hit it perfect. It makes maybe $5,000, but it at least isn't draining your income. But overall, it has to be
Very
subsidized.
hard to do.
The other part of the fair is year-round operations. Obviously, that took a big hit during COVID. Holding functions at the main building and those kind of things didn't occur. The only good thing about it, like I said, was it allowed us to address a lot of maintenance needs because you didn't have to schedule around this or that. You had access to the building and the facility. We've used it multiple times as, that was our evacuation center when they had the wildfires up the San Diego Canyon. We were in overflow, and how things were messed up over on the Marion County side. People just came to our fairgrounds with their animals and that, and it worked out really well. And they were very grateful, those people that did receive that service. We provide now a Christmas type toy distribution, all that out of our fairgrounds for a couple days. We provide to all the cities and that works out as a pretty good centralized location. We're trying to move it more into a backup emergency center operation in case something happens here or it makes sense to stage and do things at the fairgrounds because of its size and magnitude and where that, event may take place. We never know. So we're upgrading that constantly. The broadband that we're utilizing in the Rick Rail area is going to upgrade connectivity out at the fairgrounds. There's a lot of positive things that are going to be occurring at the fairgrounds. So I think if you talk to Tina, she's about as happy as she's been in a long time because things that she dreamed about getting fixed and that are actually occurring and
I
upgrading.
had the opportunity to talk to her in the last couple of weeks. She's a happy young lady.
Yeah. At times she calls me Santa Claus, so, you know, I bear gifts to her to allow her to do the maintenance stuff. And it's a part of our infrastructure and it's a very important part of our infrastructure. So neglecting it only costs you money later down the road. So, you know, I think it's going well. They have a maintenance person out there that's doing a really good job that they're really happy with. It's hard for them to find a caretaker. That's always been a difficult, unique type of position to fill. But other than that, I think things are as positive as they've been in the last decade out at the fairgrounds. So I would recommend you tentatively approve both the expenditures for annual fair and year-round operations and the total revenues.
Second?
Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. With that, I believe we are adjourned, or I'm sorry, in recess until
Thursday at
Thursday at 9.